This is the cat tax. Until you contribute to paying the bills, this is what you get to deal with.
What are you doing?
What are you doing? Get out!
I was just gonna ask what you're making next.
Probably just tonkatsu. Why?
Tonkatsu, like that ramen stuff? Didn't you already make that?
No, that's
Which was pretty mid, FYI.
Thanks.
I thought you were always into trying something new.
That was tonkatsu, moron. Different thing.
Oh, here we go again.
What?
The pronunciation police has sent the full cavalry yet again. Get a life, dude.
They are literally different words.
You are legitimately the cringe kid in Spanish class. Most foodies know about the simple tonkatsu from Japan. It's just a simple, thin-fried pork cutlet with a very savory sauce. I don't have anything new to bring to the dish, but I am going to make it with these garlic butter noodles, which I think are amazing. It's just a nice little meal to serve yourself or some friends to change things up. I'm going to start by making the cabbage that is typically served with this, but I'm going to step it up just a little bit. I'm cutting a regular head of cabbage in half and then trying to slice it really thinly with my cleaver, but it's not sharp enough, so I'm going to grab a knife and do that. Normally this is just served as is, as these really thin shreds on the side of the pork cutlet, just to provide a fresh crunch in between bites. But to make this a little bit better, I'm going to take a half of a white onion and slice that very thinly as well. Then to get rid of some of that pungent flavor, I'm going to stick this into a sieve and rinse it off for a few seconds. Then I combine that with the cabbage and then add a pinch of salt and also a small splash of rice vinegar. It's going to give a very slight flavor of pickle, which I think goes really well with something fried. I mix that up and then let it sit in the fridge while I make everything else to marinate briefly. Just make sure before you serve to pour off that excess moisture that was pulled out. And this dish is typically served with some white rice, which is fine, but I just want to make this a little bit different. I have a couple of servings of these Chinese wheat noodles left in my fridge. I've used them to make dan dan noodles before. I'm going to make them similar to like a chili oil noodle, but I'm going to use butter instead. So I'm going to get the noodles into some boiling water and boil per package instructions. While that's going, I'm going to make my chili garlic butter. Starting in a medium saucepan over medium heat, I'm going to add about 4 tablespoons of butter. I also have a tiny bit of garlic butter left in my fridge that I used for some bread, so I'm just going to add that here. Once that's mostly melted, I'm going to add the other half of the white onion. This time I've finely diced it. I'm also including the white of 1 scallion here. I grated about 2 cloves of garlic on my microplane, as well as a similar volume of ginger. After the onions soften for about 5 minutes, I can add those too. After another minute or two, I'm going to add a small pinch of red pepper flakes. You could use any hot chili flakes. Then I've got a couple of teaspoons of Korean beef stock powder or dashita. I love adding it to stuff like this. And lastly, I'm just seasoning with a couple of tablespoons of soy sauce. I just have dark soy sauce, but that'll work. And then a small handful of sesame seeds, and that's all I need to make this chili garlic butter. When the noodles are done, I'm straining most of that water off, but saving some in case I need to loosen the sauce. If you're going to let these sit for any amount of time to make the butter, I recommend rinsing these under some cold water. It'll get rid of the excess starch because otherwise these would stick together after sitting for a few minutes. I've turned the heat off on my pan and I'm adding the noodles and just mixing all this together. I added some of the pasta water off camera, but just add whatever you need to make it your desired consistency. This is a super simple chili garlic noodle that I make something similar for its own meal sometimes. But to top this off, let's make the tonkatsu. I'm going to start by mixing the sauce together to get that out of the way. I just have equal parts, about a quarter cup each of ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, and oyster sauce. Then I have a couple tablespoons of brown sugar, but you could use white sugar instead. This is normally all that's included, but I'm also adding a teaspoon of Dijon mustard just because I like the flavor. Mix all that together, and that's all you need for a really simple katsu sauce. For the pork, I just have a couple of these store-bought pork chops that I keep in my freezer. They'll work fine. I cover them with their own vacuum seal packs to prevent splatter. Take my meat mallet and I pound these until they're about a ½ inch thick. You want these to be super thin so that they're tender and that they cook super quickly. Then to tenderize these a step further, I'm going to take a fork and puncture a bunch of holes into these, maybe like 12 to 15 stabs per pork chop. You only need to do one side. Then I'm just going to lightly season on both sides with salt, pepper, and a little bit of MSG. Don't overdo it because this is not as thick as a steak and it can't take as much salt. Then I'm going to get a thin layer of neutral oil into a saucepan. These are going to be somewhere between shallow fried and deep fried, so they don't need to be submerged. While that's heating up, I'm going to build a simple breading station. I just need 3 dishes. The first is just going to be purely all-purpose flour, really easy. I'm going to crack an egg into the second one and start to beat it. You can add a splash of milk or water to make this more of an egg wash and make it easier to coat the pork. And the last dish will just be a bunch of panko breadcrumbs. I use the store-bought stuff. It's not like the fresh panko that's used in Japan, but it still gets by. Just make sure it says panko and not regular breadcrumbs. If you've ever deep fried anything, then this is a really straightforward process. You're going to pass the pork through the flour first, press it in and make sure there's no blank spots. Then transfer it over to the egg and do the same thing, just get the egg all around it, make sure there's no dry spots. And then lastly, plunge it into the panko and really press those in because they will fall off if you don't. Turn it a couple times to make sure you get good coverage on both sides. Then you can set these on a plate and wait until our oil is heated up. I want mine to get around 375 Fahrenheit because I want these to fry around 350 Fahrenheit, and it's going to go down when we add the pork. But when it's at that point, we're going to lay those cutlets away from us so they don't splatter us. This process is super quick, so don't walk away. After about 45 seconds, you can flip these. You can already see good browning on this. You can go another 45 seconds and flip one more time to make sure there's good browning on both sides. That's why we pounded the pork so thin so that it would cook super quickly. As soon as these have good browning all around, you can remove these to a wire rack just to make sure that they stay crispy while they cool off. I also love to grab some flaky salt and hit these right away so that it sticks. It just adds to the salty crunch on the outside, which is delightful. Just make sure that those rest for a couple of minutes and then you can cut these into those signature strips. Let's take a moment to appreciate the ASMR. So I'm going to plate up by adding some of my noodles to a bowl, get those lovely strips of pork spread across, add a good helping of your lovely cabbage salad, and then finish with a good drizzle of your Katsu sauce. Keep some of that nearby for dipping as well. Again, a very simple dish that could be made for a lunch or a quick weeknight dinner. I don't think I know really anybody that would turn something like this down. It hits all the senses in the best way possible. Let's get to the taste test.
I say this with a lot of my recipes, but this one's been on my radar for quite a while, and I've had most of this stuff in my freezer or fridge ready to go, so it was finally time to do it. This is definitely one of those simple yet elegant recipes that any home cook should have in their arsenal. But before this gets too cold and soggy, I'm gonna start with this tonkatsu. Cheers. That's everything you want it to be. It's just thick enough to still be juicy, but thin enough to absorb the seasonings and the crispiness all around the outside. This stuff is perfect. I've done this with a chicken breast for my Japanese curry before, and that comes out really good. I know this is the traditional way with pork, but I think I prefer the chicken version just because I like chicken. The stuff's still amazing though, and I know this is not traditional to pair it with some kind of garlic noodles, but that's what I wanted to do. I'm a fiend for noodles. I had been using those noodles up to make simple chili oil noodles, but chili butter noodles are probably even better. Some of this cabbage salad, also not traditional the way I made it, but who cares? I know it's just there for a refreshing, crisp bite, but why not add the bite of vinegar to it as well? It's really good. This can be scaled up pretty easily, made on a weeknight, made on a special night. It definitely serves a lot of purposes. You could of course just make this with rice or just some kind of more simple noodle. But the point is, go out there and try something new if you haven't yet. But that's gonna do it for me today. Thank you all for watching, be blessed, and I'll see you next time. I really do need to do this in Japan.